This is the fourth week that we've been meeting. We've been looking at a lot of different subjects in apologetics. We looked first of all at whether or not there can be just one true religion. One of the objections that non-Christians raise is that they find it offensive and arrogant that we might suggest that there is one true religion. Last week we were talking about the issue of evil and whether, as many non-Christians again will tell us, that the existence of evil is proof that either God doesn't exist, or if he does exist, that he's not a good God. And again, we talked and looked through that. And this week, we're moving on to another big objection that a lot of people have, and that is the issue of truth, absolute truth. Is there such a thing as absolute truth? And we'll get to talk about that here in just a second, but I had promised that I would bring to you guys some resources that you might want to consider looking at, might want to consider reading. I'm going to pass these two books around. The first one is The Case for Faith by Lee Strobel, and it's an excellent look at the real rational reasons that we have for believing that our faith is true and that it's something we can rest ourselves on. We're not making a blind leap into the dark when we accept Jesus Christ as our Savior. There are good, valid, rational reasons when we do it. And Strobel does a very good job of looking at that. And then another book that is directly related is an old one. This is one that was pretty new when I was about in my teens. It's called Know Why You Believe by Paul Little. And what it is it's just a classic look at the things, some of the things we're talking about, and answering some of those questions. Both of these are very good books, and they're also have the virtue of being pretty easy reads. We're not dealing with deep, heavy-duty theology when you go through these, but you get very good truth out of them. All right, the issue of truth, absolute truth. And the reason this comes up is because a lot of people will say, non-Christians will say to us that if you believe that there is absolute truth, then you must be putting yourself in a mental straitjacket. If there's absolute truth, you can't believe anything else, then you're confined as to what your thought processes are going to be. And we're going to think about that because the underlying issue that comes along with the idea of absolute truth is really an issue that is very, very prevalent in today's society, and that's the issue of freedom. So let's talk about that a little bit. Somebody want to tell me, what is the definition of freedom? How do you define freedom?
Not being tied down to something or somebody.
Okay, not being tied down. No restraints is basically what you're saying. And so that sounds like a good one. I'm sorry, what you were going to...
It depends on what kind of freedom, but just basic, the ability to choose.
Okay, the ability to choose. And I'm talking about, when we're talking freedom here right now, what the society around us would define as freedom. How would the society that we live in today, not a Christian society, but just society, define freedom?
The ability to choose anything but Christianity.
Well, that's part of it. Yep, it is. I mean, there is something there. So freedom is basically, like Nick said, the idea, and again, we're talking about society now, but the society around us is firmly convinced that the idea of freedom, that freedom is defined as there are no restraints, nothing to stop you from doing what you want to do, or in this case, believing what you want to believe. And so the reason they say that is because if there's an absolute truth, then that absolute truth puts restraints on you. Because if there's something that's absolutely true, can't be false, then either you're obeying it and getting what you want, or you're not. But you don't have a choice because it's outside of you. So that kind of leads us to the next question. Are there absolute truths in the world today? What would be an absolute truth?
The Word of God.
Okay, the Word of God. We say that. We do believe that. No question about it. A lot of society, though, does not. A lot of society would say, no, that's not absolute truth. You're basing it on faith. You have no proof of it. So,
In my world, there's gender, but somebody else's world, not.
and that's a very good example of what I'm saying about people who say, don't want to believe there's absolute truth, don't want to be constrained. And that even to this today goes as far as gender. They don't want to be constrained by I was born male or I was born female. They want to just be able to have the freedom, remember, no restraints, to say, I'll be what I want to today. I'll be a man today, a woman tomorrow, or if you follow the science and follow the literature, one of 170 other genders that science and psychologists have identified.
Or animal.
Or animal, yeah, exactly. So, this is kind of a classic case. But but right now, what I'm looking for is there an absolute truth that everyone agrees on?
No.
The world's around.
Not everybody
No.
believes
No,
that.
there's flat earthers.
There's flat Earth, yeah,
Well, we have a sun and we have a moon, so they can't argue about that.
right.
Well, I don't know.
Some
Some
people don't
people
think it's really a sun.
I don't think that there is anything that the entire world, night and day, believes in an absolute truth. Night and day.
Night and day,
There's people
maybe.
that thought it's dark and they were like, nah, it's light out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I feel comfortable.
No, it's not dark, it's just the absence of light.
Okay. I would suggest that if we want to look for an absolute truth in this world that people agree on, Christian or non-Christian, you basically have to look at science. And so I'm going a little off reservation here. But everybody would agree that there is gravity. It's an absolute truth. Yeah, that's what holds me to the floor, gravity. And you can prove it mathematically, you can prove it by observation, but everybody agrees that if you sit down on a chair, you're going to go down and you're going to stay in that chair. There's no chance that tomorrow I'm going to get up and when I sit in my chair, all of a sudden I'm going to just sort of start floating. Because gravity is about as absolute as you can get. You talk to mathematicians, and they will talk about absolute proofs.
I was going to say the first law of physics is pretty undeniable.
Mm-hmm. So there are some absolute proofs in the world that people live with, and they don't really even think about it too much. Somebody who does not want to be restrained by the idea of gender, they're still restrained by the idea of gravity. No two ways around it. So there are some absolute truths, that are out there. And now the question, though, becomes, is an absolute truth ultimately the enemy of freedom? Okay. Okay. It is not an enemy of freedom, although it does bring a restraint. If you think about it, and again, let me go back to gravity. The fact that you can confidently believe and act on the idea that if I sit down, I'm going to stay down, and if I stand up, I'm going to stand up, gives you the freedom to do all kinds of things that if you were worried every time you sat down you might float away, that you wouldn't have. If there was a question in your mind, gosh, am I going to float today, or am I going to stay in the chair, or what's going to happen? It's going to turn your whole existence around. But the fact that you don't even have to think about it, it's an automatic, it's an absolute, gives you the freedom then to plan your life, to do things, to know that you're going to be able to do them. So that in that way, an absolute truth really is not the enemy of freedom per se, even though it's a restraint. Let me suggest one other thing too, that an absolute truth is something that people want to explore. What does it mean and what does it do? Again, if you're thinking gravity, the fact that we can sit down and we can trust that we can sit down is great, but scientists love it. They can explore things, they can look at gravity, they can study it, they can figure out the mathematical principles of it, and in doing so, they can guess, okay, if our gravity is here and the moon is here, and it's going to do this, then they know exactly what it's going to do and that it's going to continue doing that. It gives them a permanent fixture to work with. And they can do that with the sun. And then they can look at stars and they can see how gravity affects all of the stars. And when they launch a rocket, it tells them, if they know what gravity is, it tells them how much power they're going to need to get that rocket off the launch pad into space. And not only that, it tells them how far that rocket has to go before it reaches the place where gravity no longer affects it. Ever wonder why it is that when we put satellites in orbit, they either put them in low Earth orbit, maybe 300-400 miles up, because a lot of times the electronics and everything else work much better there, but they also put ones that they want to stay up there permanently, 22,000 miles out, because there's a band, because they understand gravity, where at 22,000 miles, anything in that orbit has just enough gravity to stay there, but there's not enough gravity to pull it back down to Earth, like there's otherwise. An absolute truth, if you understand it, if you look at it, it gives you a base and a foundation to do all kinds of things. It gives you the freedom to do all kinds of things like launch rockets, put men on the moon, talk about going to Mars, put satellites up to figure out where planets are going, what they're doing. It's just amazing what one absolute truth is. And there are other ones, mathematically, scientifically. Now, that means this. Truth is unavoidable. You cannot avoid the truth of gravity, much as you might try. We all think of the 6-year-old who climbs up to the roof with his cape on and says, "I'm going to fly like Superman." He might jump, but gravity is still going to work. And he's going to learn a very hard lesson quite regularly. But truth is unavoidable in many cases like that. Ones we do know, ones we don't know. So understanding that, we run into a situation that he talks about in the book where people now, philosophers, they try and define truth in a way that allows them to escape it. How would you define truth if you wanted to, so that you might escape truth? It's a tough question, but people try it and do it. Well, one of the classic ways, and one that is prevalent in the world today, particularly the unsaved world, is this, that truth is maybe true, but ultimately it's just a power grab. That anybody who tells you that they're giving you a truth or telling you the truth is just trying to get power from you. And let me give you an illustration. How many of us have heard that no child should go hungry? Okay. Now, is that a truth? I mean, and I'm not looking to argue all about it, because I would say that's a truth. No child should go hungry. But if a politician stands up to you and proudly announces no child should go hungry, are they worried about children and feeding them, or are they looking for power? Are they saying no child should go hungry, therefore I'm going to ask you for more taxes to give me more money to build a structure and a bureaucracy that will feed children and that will buy food, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and I'm going to be in charge of it. There's a very strong branch of philosophy that says exactly what I just told you, that ultimately anyone who ever tries to say to you, this is true, has an ulterior motive. They're looking for power. They're trying to grab power from you or power over you. They're trying to grab power. And that is because truth to them is not like gravity. Truth to them becomes something that's malleable, if you will, and that. And so that's what we face, because if truth is a power grab, when you and I say to somebody, oh, I'm a Christian, because Christianity is true. Christianity is God speaking to us about his son Jesus Christ and the way that we can get to heaven and go there for eternity. And they're looking at you and they're saying, nonsense. All that is an absolute power grab. You just want a power and authority over me. And they will point to Rome and the Roman Catholic Church. And they will say, all that is power. You just used this. One of the classic arguments that apologetics has to deal with is the idea of absolute truth and the fact that Christianity truly is absolute truth. And so that's kind of what we're talking a little bit about today. In fact, we're talking a lot about today. Because you have to ask yourself, if Christianity is absolute truth, and it's not just a power grab, is it like gravity? In the sense that if you know it's true, that therefore you can organize your whole world around it. And not just organize your whole world around it, but you can organize your life, you can organize what you do, you can organize how you do it, you can organize what you think. All of these things, if it's absolute truth, give you a foundation to work with. Now, having said that, and that, by the way, obviously is my position, that Christianity is absolute truth, and that it is like gravity in that, since I know there is a God, and he has spoken, and this is what he has said, it's an absolute truth, God has spoken, which is available to me and to everyone, then I can organize my whole life around that. But I want to go a little bit further, because if you're not a Christian, and you say Christianity is absolute truth, what's one of the big objections that that might bring?
Can you say that again?
What are one of the big objections that Christianity is an absolute truth? What would people who are not saved object to about that?
There's several different religions out there.
Yep,
Why
there's
does it have to be Christianity?
exactly, and that's kind of what we were dealing with the first week. You know, we talked about, is Christianity the only one religion? Yes, it is. So we won't kind of revisit that. What's one of the basic tenets, though, of Christianity? You're either going to heaven or hell. That is very, very exclusive. What is one of the things that freedom, we said, as it's defined by the world, fights against? Restraints. So if you say Christianity is absolute truth, and you either believe it and you go to heaven, or you don't and you go to hell, they're going to look at you and saying, well, that restrains me from enjoying all of my life, of doing what I want to, which it quite literally does restrain that. They will, one of the big objections, again, if you read in the world today, that people have about Christianity, that a lot of non-Christians will throw in your face is, I could never be a Christian because it's too exclusive. It excludes people, and it does. Let's be straight up front. Christianity is exclusive. But having said that, when you're dealing with people who are complaining about that, they want communities to be inclusive. You think about the United States today. What's one of the biggest things that we push, or that government pushes, that woke people push, that everyone pushes? Tolerance. Exactly.
Tend to be the most intolerant people.
Exactly. Yeah, and you're right. They can be the most intolerant people, but that is, that's a mantra. That is a byword term. Tolerance. And Christianity, if it says this is an absolute truth, is intolerant, and they really can't struggle with, or they can't deal with that. But I'm going to suggest to you that Christianity, yeah, it is, but can anybody name me a community which is totally tolerant? You just mentioned that even the tolerance people aren't tolerant. What are they not tolerant of? Christians or intolerance, really.
There is
And
not a
that-
single person alive that doesn't have some sort of prejudice.
Exactly. There is not. And there is not a community in the world that is not somewhat intolerant. If you have a community, no matter how broad and big it is, there has to be some basic principle, some basic identity that draws you together into that community. It may be something very general, but there has to be. And if there's not, if you live in a community that says everyone is welcome and is totally, tolerant of everyone, well, you don't have a community. You have a world where, everybody basically does what they want to do. Because if you've got a community and it has no organizing principle, no organizing identity, then what do you got? Nothing.
That's a crime.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, and that's it. So when somebody says to us, well, Christianity is too exclusive, the answer is, yeah, just like every other community in the entire world is exclusive in some way, shape, or form. We're inclusive in the sense that anyone who wants to can be a Christian. We don't put markers out there, we don't put rules out there saying that, no one can, you can't be a Christian. But if you want to be a Christian, there are certain things that you have to accept. These are identifying marks. And, as Christians, we can go back and forth over exactly what they are, but we pretty much have an idea of who is a Christian and who is not, and who is in and who is out. And when I say out, I don't mean we hate them, and I don't mean we reject them, or I don't mean, most of all, that we say, you can't be a Christian just because of who you are. Anyone can be a Christian. But being a Christian comes with certain identifying marks and features that we can't get around. That's what makes us a community. If everybody could be a Christian and there was no idea of what a Christian was, why would you be a Christian? You're one automatically. You have to have some kind of exclusivity. That's why it's pretty simple. Come to Jesus, get to know him as Savior, and that's what marks you apart as a Christian. So we can't be totally inclusive. Now, does that mean, by the way, a lot of people say, well, if you can't be totally inclusive, then you have to be, you're a divisive influence. They say, you Christians, you go to your churches and you tell people that if they don't believe like you do, that they're going to hell. You're very divisive in that. And we have to do something about you. That's one of the things that people, again, who are not Christians, will say, ignoring the fact that every other group does the same thing. Every other group excludes some people, including the people who are totally tolerant except of intolerance. They do that. So I would suggest, though, that like when we were talking about gravity, how gravity provides a foundation and the scientists can look at that and they can study it and they can get the mathematical principles of it, and based on that stuff they can build and do things and reach out. The fact that they believe in gravity does not make them exclusive. It just simply means that they see the reality that is, and they work with it, and they deal, and they use it. It's the same way with Christians. As Christians, we are, as I said, inclusive. You have to be born again. No question around that. Having said that, anybody want to take a look around the world? How is Christianity around the world? How different is the Christianity in Haiti from the Christianity here? How different is our Christianity here from that in Asia or South America or Africa? Does that mean that they're not Christians and we are? No. But it does mean that Christianity is as inclusive as it is also totally open to variety within the bounds of are you born again? Some of you have gone on mission trips. What's it like when you are either in Haiti or in Africa? How do they practice their Christianity there? Got anybody want to tell me?
Very similar.
It's very similar, but is it different?
Different, yes.
Okay, and how is it different? And I'm not saying it's a bad thing.
Usually in the places I've been, the services are a lot longer.
Okay.
I was just saying that, the
Yeah.
word louder came to mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
And also,
Yeah, I mean, just more expressive in their
Yeah.
worship and
Mm-hmm.
also just more excited.
There you go.
Yeah.
Can we learn something from them and their Christianity? I don't want to say variation. We're Christians. We will see them in heaven. We will be joined with them. But they worship in a totally different manner. And that's one of the beauties, as I said, of Christianity and being inclusive, is that, yes, we know who is a Christian, but inside that inclusiveness, there is such a wide variety of ways to practice your Christianity. And let me push this a little further. Why do you think God makes that wide variety? Why do you think God makes it possible for, if you are a Christian, to practice your Christianity in different ways? What do you think?
To be inclusive. To be inclusive.
Okay, it is to be inclusive, but what else is it?
He knows he created us each with different personalities and
Mm-hmm.
character traits, and so we tend to gravitate towards people that are like us so if it's in our kind of worship, we're going to gravitate towards the style of church that
Yeah.
resonates best with us.
Mm-hmm.
So he made sure he created people that said, this
Communities.
group, you guys are going to worship together because you like this form.
Mhm.
You guys are a little quieter, so here's yours.
Yep.
He knows
Com-
how he created us.
You have communities within the community. And I would say, you're exactly right. God lets us adapt our belief within the bounds of what Christianity is to pretty much who we are. And I would suggest, too, that even further, that he does that for the very real reason that none of us know it all. We can learn from the Christians and the experiences you've had, from how they approach their worship. We can learn something from that about maybe what our worship should look like. Keller in the book makes the point that Christianity around the world adapts to the culture it goes into without changing. African Christianity is much, much more open and inclined to the supernatural than Western Christianity is. And there's a reason for that. It's because Christianity is a supernatural religion. We believe there is a God and Jesus Christ, and there is a heaven, and there are angels, and there are demons, and there is a whole world out there in the supernatural that we don't really touch much in the Western world. But Asian Christians, African Christians, far more in tune to that, and because of that, they are far more in tune to what this Holy Spirit can do and does. And it doesn't mean they're better, we're worse, or vice versa. It simply means that God is making sure that there are communities within Christianity that can explore each of the different areas that none of us can explore totally. No community does it totally. If you want the book on us today, Western Christianity tends to be the rational side of things. We're the ones that read the books, study Latin, Greek, Hebrew, that do the exegesis, that really get into the theology and laying out the dogmatics and laying out everything that we believe. And that's important. It really is, because it defines very well what Christianity is. Asian Christianity is far more better at community, at relationships. It's far more able to deal with community because we're so individualized here in the West. We are individuals, and that is in our DNA as hard as, because that's what we came up with politically, socially, culturally. they have far more to teach us about community because they come up in very tight-knit communities. Family is much more important there. Community. We can learn something from them. Those African Christians, they can teach us a ton about worship and joy and the supernatural and dealing with the Holy Spirit. To them, the supernatural is every day. And so they have something to teach us. And that's where, like I said, yeah, we have an absolute truth. God exists. God has spoken. He has told us that. Within the bounds of that, we are not divisive. We are inclusive. We welcome anyone who wants to join us. And we have communities within Christianity that reach out into far different areas. So that, you can't make the case that, Christianity is divisive socially. It's not. Even in the United States, you can look at the black church. You can look at the Asian church that has grown up here. You can look at our churches. There's just such a wide variety and a wide diversity that is there.
Well, looking at our own church, our worship service completely different than the Nepalese.
Yep, exactly. That's an excellent example.
Reflects our culture.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that does get to the idea that, Christianity, like I said, is not socially rigid. At its best, it is open to anyone and all of those influences. And by the way, if some of you would like, again, to follow this up a little bit, there's some, study a little bit about the church in the world today. Where do you think the center of Christianity is in the world today? It started in Jerusalem, Mideast, moved to Europe with Paul, kind of settled in Rome. Rome kind of got overwhelmed by all of the tribes, and Europe moved to the United States, where we've been the center for 500-600 years.
Asia or Africa.
Exactly. The fastest growing churches and the fastest growing Christianity areas in the world are Asia and Africa. And indeed, it feels very much to people like me that Christianity is moving from the West to the East. It's almost like you can follow it from Jerusalem to Europe to the United States to Asia and Africa. Because it's the Africans and it's the Asians who are not just growing, but who are the struggling ones. And because they're struggling, they're the ones that are strongest and are having the most impact. So read about it sometime. Just, go on Google spread of the church. Google what the church in Asia and Africa is. It's fascinating what they're doing. And it's fascinating, too, what God is doing through them. Because Pastor Kevin and I have talked before, there is a whole subset in the Mideast right now of people who have had dreams, been visited by Jesus Christ in their dreams, and become Christians. And if you listen to the testimonies some of them have, it's clear there is something going on there. So, like I said, just the church is universal. And even though we believe that it is absolute truth, within that, we can grow. Now, let me just close with one other thing, and that is this. Freedom isn't simple. I'm talking about, you can't just say freedom means no constraints, because freedom without constraints is just license. It means anybody can do whatever they want for whatever reason they want to whoever they want. It's total chaos. There has to be some type of constraints. And when you don't have them, we get to what we started talking about a little while back, gender confusion. We get to a place where we can't just say absolutely male or female. We get to a place where the psychologists, like I said, say there's 170 different genders. which is nonsense. But people believe that. And people say, if, I have to be free to believe that. And it leads to so many different damaging things that people can do. And that's just one example where freedom unrestrained, where freedom is just simply defined as being able to do whatever I want, whenever I want. That's not right. And so freedom is, if you think about it in the way we've talked, it's not the absence of restrictions. Freedom is not the absence of restrictions, it's finding the right ones. It's finding the right restrictions. Now, for you and I, Christians, we firmly believe that the absolute truth of Christianity is the perfect restriction on freedom. It leaves us free within the bounds of it to do whatever we want in furthering it. Just to give you a quick example, I happen to be a football fan, male, what can I say? I like watching football. But if I go out in the backyard and I toss my grandsons a football and say, play football, well, they're going to kind of run around and throw it at each other, but pretty quickly they're going to be, just kind of throwing it one way or kicking at it. Nothing going on. It's only when you take and you set restrictions. Okay, this is a football field, 100 yards long, 50 yards wide, 10-yard increments. When you have the football, you can throw it to somebody or you can run with it. And if you can go 10 yards, you get a first down and you get to keep trying. It's when you build in some restrictions, then you make it possible for it to be organized, but at the same time, you give it, the freedom so that no football game is ever exactly the same as any other football game. That's what makes it fun to watch. They're different, but they're constrained by the rules. Another one, how many musicians do we have in here? Okay.
I don't like to call myself a musician anymore.
Okay. But anybody who's a musician, who even, just passable and that, I'm not talking about an artiste and that, but you have to give up something in order to become a musician. You cannot learn to play the piano or the guitar or whatever it is without sitting down at a piano, learning the basic scales. You got 7 notes, and out of those 7 notes, there's a world of music. But learning how to play that piano requires you to give up something. That means that the time you're spending on the piano, that's a restriction that you give yourself because you want to become a musician and you want to be better. And if you're not willing to do that, if you want freedom totally without constraints, you're never going to accomplish anything. You will just simply be out there and existing. And that's not where you want to go. So let me just close here with this. And this is from the book, but it really fits. Freedom, as I said, is not so much the absence of restrictions as it is finding the right ones. What are the right restrictions for us? Well, first of all, they fit the reality of our nature. If you're a musician, okay, you want to play music, but what's your nature? Are you content to sit down at a piano with 88 keys, or do you want to be a drummer because you want to bang things and make loud noises and go crazy on your drum set? Are you somebody that maybe wants to be a violin player or a guitar player? What's your nature? Within the bounds of the restraint, find something that fits your reality. To get back to my football illustration, a lot of kids grow up thinking, I want to be a professional football player. But when you're 16 years old and you're 5'6" and 130 pounds, the odds are good that that's not what your nature is leading you to. Or you can try, you can say, I'm going to do all the exercises, lift all the weights, but it's probably not going to get you very far, and it's going to be frustrating when you try that. So first of all, what's the reality of your nature? What do you like? You know, what has God gifted you? Where are you being led here? And then once you do find that, the restrictions produce greater power and scope for your abilities. You may have natural talent. I've got a 10-year-old granddaughter, Mia, who literally sits at the piano at our house, and without any lessons, without any training, she has that sense of being able to make the notes sound good. I mean, she's not playing a song, but it's not just sort of this discordant piano banging. That's what I get from my grandsons. Bang, bang, bang. But no, Mia, you know, she kind of plays and she has this ear for how it sounds. Well, when she starts to get lessons, when she starts to learn and she figures out, okay, these are the 88 keys, this is middle C, and middle C goes with this, and the black keys do this. As she gets to learn that and practice that and do that, the scope and power of her abilities will grow. Maybe she'll never be a concert pianist. Doesn't matter that much. But she will grow the ability and the musical talent that she has because she is restraining it to the keyboard and to music and then following that. And that will in turn, if she follows it, if she gets good, allow her then the freedom maybe to write music, maybe the freedom to play music that we haven't heard before. It gives her a freedom, though, that comes from from the constraints. So do you see how freedom works through restraint? And ultimately, it produces deeper joy and fulfillment. Somebody who has spent the time learning the piano when all of their friends are outside playing, down the road when they are at a friend's house and they start playing the piano and all of a sudden people kind of start gathering around saying, that's really good, and listening to it. What kind of joy and fulfillment do they start to feel? Do they have just simply because they're able to do something no one else does? And it can bring people in, can do all kinds of things. It's something that they can really rejoice in. So when somebody tells you that Christianity is a straitjacket, when somebody tries to say to you, I'm not a Christian because I don't want all of the rules are what make it possible for us to really find true, eternal fulfillment and joy in our life. Not because it constrains us from doing anything, because it enables us to turn loose the powers, the gifts, and the talents that we have within us. So I'm finished for today. Any questions? Anything you want to ask? All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us today, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.